Todos, hola a todas, bienvenidos, bienvenidas y bienvenidos también a este encuentro muy especial con la comunidad de psicosimática y con Rupert Sheldrake, a quien tenemos el privilegio de tener con nosotros para una conversación sobre sus hipótesis, sobre sus planteamientos y las preguntas que también surgen a partir de ella, de sus trabajos y sus propuestas. Así que estoy muy contenta de tener el privilegio de que tengamos a Rupert nuevamente aquí en Psicosimática. Así que, sin más, Rupert, thank you very much for being here one more time.
Mm.
It's a pleasure to have you here again in Psicosimática.
It's good to be with you again.
Okay, we can start with the questions I already sent you. I'm gonna read the first one. The first question I have for Rupert is, what is the cause or genesis of the morphic field? How is it created?
Well, there's two aspects to this question. The first is that how it's created in the first place in evolution. This is really the problem of creativity. The second is, in a given situation, how does it appear? So, for example, if you have a chemical which is crystallizing, then as it crystallizes, the morphic field appears around the growing crystal and helps to shape its crystallization process. The fields appear in time and space around the systems they organize. And in that sense, they're a bit like magnetic fields. If you switch on an electromagnet, the field will appear around it, and it will then have effects all around it. So morphic fields appear around the systems they organize, but they appear on the basis of similarity to previous systems. So you have the question then, how did each kind of morphic field come into being in the first place? The first morphic field for an eye, or the first morphic field for a wing, or the first morphic field for an idea, like Newton's theory of gravitation, because ideas are also forms which have fields. And this is really the problem of creativity. And nobody knows how creativity happens. Obviously, it does happen because the entire evolutionary process in the whole cosmos, in biological life, in cultural evolution, in human creativity, in the evolution of the arts, there's clearly creativity going on in all these processes. If there wasn't, things would simply repeat the same way they were before. So there has to be creativity. And the question is, how does a new field, a new pattern of organization come into being? Well, this has a number of philosophical answers. I myself leave the question open, but basically theories of creativity come in two categories, bottom up and top down. And bottom up theories of creativity say that creativity wells up from the unconscious, or that it emerges from less complex systems. And so it's the idea of it appearing from something less complicated to something more unified. The top-down theories say that creativity happens because everything that occurs is within a greater system of organization. For example, everything on Earth is within the solar system, which is a larger field. The field of the solar system is a larger, literally a larger gravitational field and electromagnetic field than the field of the Earth. And so everything that happens on Earth is within this larger field of the solar system and of the galaxy and of the cosmos. And those kinds of creative ideas have that the creativity comes down from a higher level. And in the past, in ancient times, the Greeks and Romans thought that the creativity came through a spirit, which would be connected with a person or a place or a thing, and be creative. It's genius, and so the genius inspired the creativity. Well, nowadays, for materialists, who are so common today in universities and elsewhere, they don't believe in spirits and they don't believe in anything except material processes. So for them, the creativity just has to happen by chance. But and then of course you can say, well, isn't it not just top bottom up or just top down, but maybe a combination of them both? So there's no clear, simple answer to creativity. And I think the question has to be left open from a scientific point of view.
We have another question that I think that is related, that it said that could it be said that a morphic field is born when two or more beings make some kind of agreement or have something in common? It's still connected with creativity, I think.
Yes, well, I think this is the case that a morphic field, how they work is they organize systems that are within them. So the field of a subatomic particle would be like that, but that field of the subatomic particle will be inside the field of the atom. And the field of the atom is inside the field of the molecule. And the field of the molecule might be inside a bigger field of a crystal. So the higher level fields literally enclose the lower level fields. So when a molecule comes into being, for example, a molecule of water, H2O, hydrogen and oxygen come together into a larger whole, which is the molecule of the water. So yes, then a morphic field happens when there's a kind of synthesis of parts that come together in a larger whole. And you see the same thing in the realm of ideas. If we take the theory of gravitation of Isaac Newton, he brought together separate ideas into a bigger whole. Everybody before Newton knew that things fell towards the earth, that apples dropped off trees. Everybody knew that the moon was related to the tides. The pattern of the tides was related to the phases of the moon. But what no one had ever connected before was the way that a single principle could unify these things. If with the principle of gravitation, if everything attracts everything else, according to Newton's theory, then the Earth attracts things so they fall towards it. But the Earth is also attracting the moon, which is why it goes round and round the Earth instead of flying off at a tangent. But also the moon attracts the Earth, and the only thing on the Earth that can actually move in response to the moon are the tides. So the level of the sea goes up and down. So when Newton connected these separate ideas together into a bigger idea, the idea of gravitation, again, it was the kind of process you're talking about in this question, when a morphic field is born, when two or more beings make some kind of agreement or have something in common. They were brought together within, these separate ideas are brought together in Newton's larger theory.
Could you say that morphic fields are a kind of subtle matter? You are very critic of materialism, so I think that this is a very interesting question to ask about what is like what kind of matter or what kind of energy it is. You know, is a kind of subtle matter, or are they more closely associated with ideas such as Henry Corbin's Imaginal world?
Well, it's a question that applies to all kinds of fields. You see, if you take the electromagnetic field, in the 19th century, when Faraday discovered the connections between electricity and magnetism and put forward the idea of magnetic fields and electric fields, then everyone said to Faraday, what are the fields made of? So Faraday had two answers. He said his favorite answer was that the fields are not made of anything. They're modifications of mere space. They're patterns in space. And they're made of space. And the space has form or structure. That was his first idea. But most people didn't like that in the 19th century, which was very materialistic. The other idea was that they're made of subtle matter, which he called the ether. That was the usual word for subtle matter in the 19th century. And Maxwell, who formed his famous equations of electromagnetism, which showed that electricity and magnetism and light are aspects of the same phenomenon, he used the ether concept, and he thought that light was a vibration in the subtle matter, ether, which permeated all space. But at the beginning of the 20th century, experiments showed that the ether didn't exist. And Einstein, in his special theory of relativity, said that electromagnetic fields are not made of subtle matter. They're just made of the fields themselves. The fields themselves are patterns in space. So in a way, Einstein took it back to Faraday's first idea that the fields are patterns in space. And there are different kinds of fields. There's the gravitational field, of course, which has a spatial form and creates forms. I mean, the Earth is round, the Sun is round, the Moon is round, because of the gravitational field, which creates these forms. And that's a pattern in space. It's not made of ether or subtle matter. Quantum matter fields, like the electron field, the proton field, are again patterns in space, and an electron is a vibration within an electron field, which is a pattern, a shape. So I think that morphic fields, like other kinds of fields, are patterns in space which organize vibrations and the pattern of the vibrations. So the morphic field organizing the shape of a leaf, for example, on a tree, is a sort of leaf-shaped, invisible leaf-shaped structure which molds or shapes the developing leaf as it forms. But the field itself is not made of stuff. It contains energy, but it's not made of energy. The point about all fields is that they organize energy, but they're not the energy itself. It's like the energy in a plug, an electric plug. When you plug something in, the energy can take any form. It can power a hairdryer, an electric toaster, a computer, a microphone, or an electric heater. It can do all these different things, but the things it does depend on the form of the structure that it's going into. The energy itself doesn't have form. Energy is promiscuous. And the energy within all the different things in nature, it can be converted into the energy in other things. So light energy can be converted into heat energy into mechanical work, and so forth. So the energy that morphic fields organize is energy, but the fields themselves are not energy. They're forms which organize energy.
That's very interesting. I remember some of the ancient explanations for astrology. For example, Al-Kindi, this Arabic astrologer, he said that the planets were like sending a kind of rays, that everything actually is transmitting some kind of rays. That's how the planets can influence human agency, let's say, or events on Earth. And also a very ancient idea, very strong idea that reminded throughout the history of astrology, I think, is the idea of the planets being the organizers of time, like the administrators of time, and time has quality that is a kind of energy. So I think that you are saying something similar in that sense. I think that are articulated what you are saying about form and these Pythagorean ideas, or the ideas of planets as organizers that organize time, like that is organized energy in a kind of bigger fields. I don't know if you have something to add to this.
Well, it's literally the case that the entire solar system is in a field. It's in the gravitational field of the sun, interacting with the gravitational fields of the planets. I mean, that's not controversial. That's just standard textbook physics. It's also true that they're related to each other through the electromagnetic field, which is why we can see the planets. Light is an electromagnetic radiation, and it's literally true that rays come from the planets to us through the electromagnetic field, which is the light we see them by. So there's one level, this is uncontroversial. This is just standard ordinary physics. But if we think about that a little bit, then if we think of the whole solar system as an organism, and it has a membrane around it, the whole solar system has the heliopause, which is like electromagnetic membrane around the entire solar system. It has a kind of tail, a bit like the Earth has a magnetic tail. And this membrane around the whole solar system, the heliopause, is electromagnetic membrane that shelters the sun from the galactic wind. There's a stream of electrical charged particles in the galactic wind. Just as the solar wind, the sun has streams of particles, we're in the solar wind. The whole solar system is in the galactic wind with this membrane around it. So it's literally within a field. There's a field of the solar system, and the position of the planets within the solar system in relation to the sun would make the field have different qualities, gravitational, electromagnetic, and maybe other, and the morphic field of the whole system as well is changing as the planets change their relative positions. So at any given moment, the organism of the solar system is going to be different because of the relative positions of the planets within it. And so the quality of time within it will be different. Now, to what extent and how that affects or is related to events on Earth is another question. But I think from these general principles, it's clear that the whole solar system is a kind of organism, and it's within a larger organism, the entire galaxy, which again is a superorganism. The stars in the galaxy are like cells in the body of the galaxy, and at the galactic center is a supermassive black hole, which is incredibly energetic and is like the brain of the galaxy. So I think it's perfectly valid scientifically, even with conventional science, to think of the polar solar system as an organism and the relative positions as affecting the quality of time within the organism.
Thank you, Rupert. I'm going to continue with the next question. It says, do morphic fields emerge or materialize from memory and experience, or are they an independent dimension or reality with a different ontology and laws than material reality?
Well, I think that morphic fields are physical, that they play a role in the organization of nature. I think atoms, molecules, crystals, cells, animals, plants, solar systems, I think they're all organized by fields. And the field, the organizing field of, say, a plant, is that which shapes the plant, and it's part of nature. And they're just as real as the fields of electromagnetism or gravity. You can't see electromagnetic fields, you can't see gravitational fields. All around all of us right now, there are gravitational fields. The Earth's gravitational field is holding us down. We would all be floating around if it wasn't. And we're all embedded in the electromagnetic field, which is why we can see each other on screens in front of us. So we can't see the field itself. And in all of us are embedded in huge numbers of electromagnetic radiation fields, transmissions of mobile telephones and of radio and television. This room I'm in is full of them, and so is the room you're in. They're everywhere, but they're invisible. So I think these morphic fields are similar to these other fields in the sense that they're real, but they're not made of matter. And that's what's so interesting about 20th century physics compared with 19th century physics, is that the theory of matter as a result of quantum theory is that matter is not fundamental in nature. Matter is energy bound within fields. The two most fundamental principles in nature are energy and fields. And fields organize energy, but they're not the same as energy. As I just said, an electron is a vibration in an electron field, and an atom is a series of proton and neutron and electron vibrations within an atomic field. The field isn't something you can see, but you can see what it organizes. And so there's a distinction between physical and material. Material means made of matter. Physical means part of nature, and there's a lot of nature which is not matter. Light is not matter, for example. The fields, the gravitational field is not matter. It's connected with matter, but when you go halfway to the moon, the gravitational field of the Earth and the moon that a body will experience there are not made of matter, although the Earth and the moon are made of matter. So we now have, in many ways, modern physics has dematerialized nature, because a lot of it is real and physical, but not material. And I think that's true of morphic fields as well.
Thank you, Rupert. And connected with this idea of that we cannot see the field, but we see the effect of the field, not the field itself, but the effect, the consequence of it. And there are some other questions about how we can access these kind of fields. Will the morphic field be something collected that permeates us involuntarily? It is possible to access the morphic field through or by will?
Well, I think that the whole of our body is surrounded by and permeated by the morphic field that shapes the body all the time. We wouldn't exist without the fields that shape us. And as we grew as embryos in our mother's wombs, we were shaped by the morphic fields, human morphic fields that shaped our development. And those fields continue to maintain us. If we're damaged, if we cut ourselves, then the wound will heal again, because the morphic field helps to restore the wholeness of the body. So whether we like it or not, we're embedded in and organized by morphic fields, our bodies. Our minds are organized by morphic fields too. Every kind of structure that organizes our minds is a kind of field. And language is a sort of field, and the shapes and forms of words are a kind of field. We're embedded in fields like fish are in water. I mean, we couldn't exist without being organized by our thoughts, organized by these fields, our culture organized by these fields. Structures of thought are fields, like theories of gravitation, which I mentioned earlier. These are like fields. There are structures of relationship. Now, can we call upon them? Yes. I mean, if a morphic field is really a habit, it's a habit of thinking, a habit of behaving, a habit of organizing form. And if we consciously want to tune into a morphic field, we can tune into it voluntarily. I mean, for example, the whole Spanish language and the English language have different morphic fields. The words are different fields, the structure, the metaphors, the concepts. I mean, you can translate them, but they're different fields. And you can switch between them at will, because you can speak good English and obviously good Spanish. So I can't. I have less option when it comes to language. But you can switch, just changing language is tuning into a different field. And it's a little bit like channels on a TV set. You have all these different channels. You don't invent the channels, but you can tune into different ones by just pressing a button or flipping a switch. You can go on from one channel to another channel. And there's a whole different set of programs and people talking and music and stuff on the different channels. And so we're able consciously to choose some of the morphic fields with which we interact. If we choose to learn another language, if we choose to go to a new place and experience the culture of that place and so on, all of these things where we can choose to tune into these different morphic fields.
Yeah, true. Actually, it's very impressive that when you fly or when you travel to a place where people speak another language, and how you start to understand, somehow you start to understand, because I used to say that this is the morphic field of of the place, because it's like you can tune with the language language more easily when you are in the field, you know, like if I go to London, for example, I can speak better English than if I am in Barcelona, for example.
Yes, well, I think so. I think, well, because it's more similar. The surroundings are more similar. Morphic resonance depends on similarity. And, you know, when you're in London and lots of people are speaking English, and they always have done in London, then just the whole ambience, the culture, the background noise, everything tunes you in.
Yeah.
And I think when we learn languages, we tune in by morphic resonance to past people who've spoken the language, which is why I think babies are able to learn language so quickly, because they're actually resonating, tuning in by resonance, picking it up by resonance. And once you've learned a particular language, it makes it harder to learn other ones because you've now got established habits, which is why children who grow up in bilingual families, you know, they may learn language a bit slower to start with, but it's much easier for them to learn it when they're young than when they're adults, because children more naturally resonate with what's going on around them and pick up languages quicker.
Mm. Yeah, before going to the next question, there is here another question from Francesc that he asked about that if the morphic fields also contains memories of the future, because you are talking about morphic fields as habits, and usually when we talk about habits, we talk about the past and memories, something that we have already done, but there are memories of the future also contained within the morphic fields.
I don't think so, because I, I think of morphic resonance as working only from the past. It's a
Mhm.
principle of memory or habit. So I think that we can't remember the future, but I think we can, in some occasions, connect with the future. I mean, precognitive dreams really happen. I'm sure of that. I've had them myself, and people who studied precognition it have shown, I think, conclusively that many people can dream of something that happens in the future, usually only a few days in advance. It's usually in the next 2 or 3 days. So that can happen, but I don't think it's exactly a memory of the future. I think we are actually connected to our future to some degree, but exactly how it works, nobody knows. It certainly doesn't work in the routine way that normal memory works, because we don't have a complete view of the next 2 or 3 days in the same way we can remember the last 2 or 3 days. It's unusual and occasional, and it only usually happens in dreams that people get a glimpse of the future. So it's there are various ways of thinking about this, and one is that one is to get into time paradoxes. Well, if this causal influence is coming back from the future in time, you might be able to affect things, and you get into a whole kind of science fiction scenarios. Another way that people think about it is to say that, well, what is the present? Because normally we think of the present as an instant, but actually the present is spread out in time. That's why when you go to the cinema, you don't see a series of still pictures. They all blur together and you see a moving picture in the cinema, because our own present conscious presence is at least 10 milliseconds, and some measurements show about 500 milliseconds, half a second long, before we can register something as being in the present. And what if instead of 500 milliseconds, sometimes the present is 2 minutes long or 10 minutes long or a day or two long? Then if the present is spread out, it could, if this is the present here and this is the future and this is the past, it could be spread out so that the present is just spread out into the past, 100 milliseconds, a minute, 2 minutes, or it could be spread out so that it's spread out both ways, and that some of what we think of as the future is actually connected to the present and is part of an extended present. And it may be that these precognitive dreams are part of an extended present. It's usually only a few days. Occasionally people have them weeks or months in advance, but it's usually quite near future. So I don't think that morphic resonance is exactly a memory of the future. And I think that this ability to consciously to experience in dreams, it's mysterious. No one understands it, but it's not a kind of routine thing like morphic resonance, which is coming from the past, although it does seem to happen.
You just said consciously, and I think that is a good point for our next question, that is about this metaphor that you usually use about the radio or television, that our brain is like a television, that our brain only receive and transmit, but our memories are not stored in our brains, associated in relationship with this idea of if we can access by will morphic fields. And if our brains are like a television, that we have a kind of receiver and transmitter, and you as a biologist as well, where is it is located in our brain, that part that receives and transmit, or is it intuition? Is part of our brain? How is that works?
Well, the answer is no one really knows, but I think that the what I think of as the interface is not the brain itself, but the activity of the brain. And what's become clear over the last 40 or 50 years is that the main way that brains act is through having rhythms, patterns, waves, electromagnetic waves going through the brain, you know, alpha rhythms, theta rhythms, and so on. But more detailed research on the brains of mice and rats in recent years has shown that you don't just have sort of patterns, waves of like alpha rhythms going over the surface of the brain like that. You have very, very detailed wave patterns when rats or mice are learning to run through a maze, for example. You get a very, very complex electromagnetic pattern. And when they remember what they've learned before, you get the same electromagnetic pattern. So I think that the morphic resonance is interrelated with these electromagnetic patterns in the brains, and it helps to shape them as well. The normal theory of memory within conventional science is that all our memories are stored as physical or material traces inside the brain. But this has been very hard for them to prove. In fact, they've never managed to prove it because these memories always seem to slip away whenever they think they've located them. And the same is true of these complex patterns on the brains of mice. When they've learned a task, when they remember it, you get the same pattern, but it's not always in the same place. And it may move a little bit from one place to another each time. And this is called, in the scientific literature, it's called representational drift, that the pattern can drift around on the surface of the brain. If it was stored in physical traces in the cells or in the synapses, it would always be located in the same place, sort of frozen to a spot. But actually, what's important is the pattern of activity. And I think that wave pattern of activity is what resonates. Resonance occurs between wave patterns. And we literally know from all this recent research that there really are these complex wave patterns in brains that are associated with particular things that are remembered. So I think what's remembered is the wave pattern, and the wave pattern is set up by the activity of the nerves by coordinating all the sort of waves that are going on anyway in the nerves, bringing together, imposing a kind of pattern upon them, which I think is the memory, the physical manifestation of the memory through a kind of resonance across time.
Interesting. Thank you, Rupert. Let me introduce a new question here that Astrid wrote here in the chat. She said that are we the result of a nature that thinks about itself? With this concern and in light of the approaches to the extended mind and artificial intelligence as an extended mind of the human being, I am examining in a master in philosophy the possibility that we are an extended mind of nature.
Well, this is a big question, isn't it? It comes back to the question of creativity as
Yeah.
well. To what extent is our creativity as humans influenced by the mind of nature, the imagination of nature? Well, again, this would come back to what I was saying before about top-down and bottom-up creativity. If is it influenced by the earth, Gaia? If the earth is a living organism and Gaia has a kind of mind, we're within the mind of Gaia, and is Gaia, the whole earth, influencing the whole of humanity through a kind of collective consciousness and our creativity? Well, the earth certainly is influencing human consciousness. I mean, climate change alone is something which everybody is aware of now, and is affecting the way we think, and it makes a lot of people very pessimistic. But so it's certainly affecting our consciousness. It may not be doing it through deliberate conscious reflection. We don't know to what extent the earth is conscious and to what extent the earth can influence human culture by influencing things like earthquakes and climatic unusual heat waves and storms and hurricanes and so on. And of course, we're also influenced by the sun and the influence of the sun because of solar flares, coronal mass ejections, 11-year sunspot cycles. All these things are known to influence life on Earth and human life and creativity. And then, of course, from the point of view of astrology, we're influenced not just by the sun, but from the relative positions of the other parts of the solar system, the planets. So I think all of these things uncontroversially influence us. The fact we're influenced by knowing about climate change, it's uncontroversial that it affects human thought, human minds, and our collective activity or lack of activity. So when it comes to creativity, though, it's harder to know, because if we're going to look at sources of creativity outside human minds or beyond human minds, then we've got several candidates. We've got the Earth, we've got the sun and the whole solar system, we have the whole galaxy, we have the whole cosmos. But then we also traditionally, and in my view, I think rightly, have the idea of consciousness that works through nature, that transcends nature. In other words, the consciousness of God or the divine. And then in most traditional cosmologies, there's the idea that there are conscious spirits which can influence us, like angels, or the Greeks thought in terms of the muses. They thought that the different arts, each art, poetry, music, and so on, had its own muse, which was a spirit that inspired the people. That's why we call music music. It's named after a muse, an inspiring intelligence, female inspiring intelligences. And so there are all these candidates, you see, that could influence human creativity, and we don't really know which ones are doing it. But traditionally, people ask for inspiration. You know, people could ask. They ask the gods or goddesses or God for inspiration. In South India, where I used to live, at the beginning of a concert, a classical South Indian music concert, the very first song is always an invocation to the goddess Saraswati, who's the goddess of music, asking her to inspire the performer and the audience. And you know, if you believe in God and if you believe in saints and angels, you can pray to God and saints and angels asking for help and for inspiration and for creativity. If you think that Gaia can inspire you, you can ask Gaia to inspire you. You can open a channel through prayer for creativity. It may just happen spontaneously and come unasked, and most of the time it does. But in traditional societies, less atheistic than our own, people have always had the idea that you can open channels by prayer and ask for the creativity and the inspiration to come into your life.
Yeah, yeah. Actually, it's also an astrological practice that we were talking about this before this meeting, the devotional practice of astrology and how we, in the same way you are saying, we can access to the intelligence of the planets. And this is very in line with some people here is asking about if we also can influence the morphic field, if we can access it. Can we change the habits of the morphic field as well? Somehow, if our mind and the morphic field are connected and we can access it, we can change the habits of the environment or of nature?
Well, morphic fields are basically habits, and you can change habits, but it's hard to change habits, isn't it? I mean, that's why people have psychotherapists, because they get into emotional habits and habits of relationship with other people which are dysfunctional, and the psychotherapist can help them to see the pattern, see the habit, and then try and change it. Or more often it's a matter of replacing one habit with another one. If people have a habit of being alcoholic, drinking too much alcohol, then you can change the habit, you can drink less, but for people who are really bad alcoholics, the only answer is to have another habit. And the whole point of movements like Alcoholics Anonymous and 12-step recovery programs is that they give people an alternative habit. And if your whole social life depends on meeting people in a bar and drinking with them, and you stop drinking, then the whole of your social habits disappear as well, and you're isolated and you can't survive like that. So you have to create a new habit. Instead, you go to meetings of Alcoholics Anonymous, which are support groups, which give you a new social group that supports your new habit. So we can change habits, but very often it's a matter of switching to a new one. If the old habit is a bad one that we want to change, and we can also practice habits. I mean, in ancient Greece, the idea of the virtues were, people don't talk much about virtues now, but the virtues of courage and temperance and prudence and wisdom. These habits. The virtues were habits. Aristotle said that virtues are habits, and vices, the opposite of virtues, are habits. The 7 deadly sins, sort of greed and lust and avarice and gluttony and laziness and so on. These are habits, bad habits that people can get into. But good habits, virtues are good habits. If you cultivate the habit of being generous or kind or loving, then that will become a kind of default way in which you exist. You don't have to think about it, it just becomes a habit. And so a lot of traditional moral training in the ancient Greek world, in the traditional Christian world as well, and in all religions and in all cultures, is about cultivating good habits, which traditionally are called virtues in Europe. And so there's always been the idea that you can choose habits and change habits by giving up bad habits and taking up good ones instead.
I have 2 more questions, Rupert. Here, Luisa asked about the déjà vu. If the déjà vu can be connected with the explanation of the morphic field?
Well, déjà vu is where people experience something and then they think they've experienced it before. It's familiar and they know what's going to happen next. And there are several possible explanations for déjà vu, but the one I find most persuasive, it may not explain all cases, but it may explain some cases, is that if you have a precognitive dream about something, and then a day or two later you actually experience the thing you've dreamt about, that could underlie the sense of déjà vu. It seems familiar, you've experienced it before. And you have an uncanny sense of familiarity and knowing what's going to happen next. But in that sense, it's a kind of memory of a dream, and the dream was an anticipation of the future. So it's both a memory and an anticipation at the same time. So yeah, I don't think déjà vu can be just memory, because memory is by definition only of the past, but it can be a memory of a dream of the future.
Last question. This is a personal one because, as I already told you, the name of this organization is Psyche Cymatics. That cymatics is connected with the metaphysics of the project, let's say, is kind of my vision about my cosmovision with cymatics. So I was wondering what kind of insight cymatics gave you for your research, your hypothesis. What do you discover through your experiments with cymatics?
Well, I've learned a lot through doing experiments with cymatics. I mean, I have here in my home a laboratory, and with my son Merlin, who's best known for actually there's a picture of him.
Ah, yeah.
Yes, there. He's
And
my
the other one
son,
is Cosmos, that is a
Cosmo.
musician.
Yes, Cosmo is the
Yeah.
musician.
Yeah, very
And
great musician.
and Merlin wrote a book on fungi,
Yeah.
Entangled Life, which
Yes.
I
Yes.
think it's in Spanish. So. But anyway, Merlin and I did these experiments on cymatics, and we've published one paper on it, and it's on my website, Faraday wave patterns in water. We have another paper that we're working on at the moment, a cymatic paper. Basically, what cymatic shows is all the many patterns of vibration that you can form through just vibrating a fluid. In the cymoscope, you have a small container with water, and by vibrating it up and down, patterns of waves appear on the surface. Faraday waves, they're called, because of Faraday, who first described them.
Ah, yeah, I didn't know.
Yes, well, Faraday, Michael Faraday, the same one who did electromagnetism and so on, he was a brilliant experimental scientist, and he experimented on waves in vibrating fluids. And he was the first person really to describe systematically these patterns. And so, well, I think what these patterns show is they provide a kind of model, an analog model for vibratory patterns in general. And for people who've not studied them, it's very surprising that just vibrating the fluid can produce so many different patterns. It can produce patterns with so many different symmetry groups. I could illustrate it. Just a second.
Yep.
So here's a copy of the paper that Melanie and I wrote together. And on the cover, you see these are just different patterns with the fluid vibrated. You see there's two here. This is a twofold pattern, and this one is a sixfold pattern. This is eightfold pattern. Then we've 10, 12, 14, 16, 18, 20. We get these different symmetry patterns just by adding vibration. It's the same water, nothing's changed in the water, but these complex patterns appear. And then we systematically explored differences of vibration frequency of 1 hertz.
Oh, wow.
That we have, as you go up 1 hertz, the pattern changes, and you can see systematically how these patterns alter. And then if you look at if you plot on a graph the patterns, they follow a kind of systematic order. You see this, it's like
Mm-hmm.
this is 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14, 16, 18. Then it starts again, 4, 6, 8, 10, 4, 6, 8, 10. But you see there's a systematic mathematical regularity that you see in the appearance of these patterns. And we're working out the mathematics at the moment. The paper we're publishing next on this is jointly written with Dr. Adix Gomez Marin, who's in
Mm-hmm.
Alicante, the
Mm-hmm.
neuroscientist, who you've met, Soledad, and or at
Yeah.
least who you've talked to.
Yes.
And the mathematical function that describes them is called a Bessel function, and it's the same patterns you get on a vibrating drum head. When you vibrate a drum, and the patterns you get with the skin on the drum are the same patterns. The same mathematics explains the same waves. And if you then look at an atom, the way the electrons are arranged around an atom in standing waves, those follow the same mathematics. So this pattern, these wave patterns, appear in all levels in the very structure of the quantum level in the atoms. There are wave patterns around the atom as standing waves, like these waves are standing waves. A standing wave is a wave where you've got a wave that goes up and down like that in the same place, unlike a wave on the sea or the ocean, which goes from one place to another. The standing wave it's waving, but it's waving up and down in the same place. So you have a pattern that is there. Now, I think that everything in nature is made up of wave patterns. Atoms are wave patterns, molecules are wave patterns. This is just standard physics and chemistry. This is not a speculative theory. Everything in biology is rhythmic. The molecules vibrate, and there are electric wave patterns in brains and around the membranes of cells. We have wave patterns, electric wave patterns from our beating hearts. You know, we have the brain rhythms. There are all these rhythms in nature, and there are certain basic principles of waves which you can reveal in the cymoscope, these cymatic patterns. It's the simplest way to see them in vibrating fluids in situations like this. But what this does is gives us a window on the very nature of reality at all levels, which is vibratory. And I would say that the vibrations are what underlie morphic resonance. Now, one reason I got interested in the cymoscope was to see whether you had morphic resonance between cymoscope patterns. If you make a pattern appear, does it appear more easily the next time in the cymoscope? And it doesn't. And I think the reason it doesn't is because these are not self-organizing patterns. They don't spontaneously just do it themselves, like a cell or an atom or a molecule is spontaneously self-organizing. These only appear as forced vibrations. If you force the vibration, you get the pattern to appear. As soon as you switch it off, the pattern disappears.
It disappears.
It's because it's passively appearing in response to an imposed force. You're imposing vibration. So it's as it were passively responding to that in that pattern, but it's not actively creating the pattern in the way that electrons around an atom are actively creating that wave pattern. It's not being pushed onto the atom from outside, it's arising from inside. Whereas these are being forced from outside, the vibratory pattern.
Yeah.
So they differ, these cymatic patterns differ from self-organizing patterns, rhythmic patterns in systems where it's not just being imposed upon them, but they illustrate the very basic principles of waves and wave patterns, which I think are present in all aspects of nature.
Yeah. Thank you, Rupert. We are at the end now, and thank you very much for being here one more time in Psychosematica and with me in particular. It's always a pleasure to talk with you, and always I'm very grateful for your trust and for your kindness and openness every time. So thank you very much.
Well, thank you. I enjoy talking with you as well, and thank you for helping to make morphic resonance better known in the Spanish-speaking world through helping to organize this course.
Yeah. Here we are all together again to finish together this encounter with Rupert Sheldrake. Si quieren seguir profundizando, está relanzando el curso en su web de resonancia mórfica. También encuentran material sobre la mente extendida y algunas otras participaciones dentro de la membresía. Rupert, thank you very much. See you here or there.
Thank you, Soledad. Bye.
Gracias a todos y a todas por estar aquí.